before we start, or maybe as just a way of starting, I just want to just share with you a feeling, right? Which is, it's a strange feeling, but one which I've become more familiar with, which is a feeling of terror. A strange way to start, right? But a feeling of terror, right? You know, a feeling of terror. And at the same time, a feeling of exhilaration, almost ecstatic, right? At the immense possibility of this time. So this is a time of intense terror. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means today and maybe part of tomorrow. We're going to stay in that a little bit and just kind of feel where we are today in the world. And we're going to do it with great joy. Right? There's a very beautiful text, which is from the ancient mystics, which is Gilu Bira'ada. Tremble with joy. Isn't that a beautiful text? Right? Tremble with joy. Isn't what Eros is about? Right? To tremble with joy. So I just want to invite everyone to begin to step into this place of trembling with joy. And I apologize, I mean, insincerely, but I do apologize for starting so seriously. I feel serious. Right? I was up a good part of the night and the night before, just with this sense of what's actually worth saying. Do you get what I mean by that? Right? What's actually worth saying, right? And maybe we can, begin just by setting our intention. And we'll pray a little bit, in the way that we do. I can't quite believe that it's 10 years, right? Big, we have a huge week, right? Welcome, right? Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have a huge, wonderful, it's a wondrous time, right? Yeah, welcome, welcome, welcome. Dimba-damba-rinna-ranna-rinna, hey, hey, welcome, welcome. Binna-ranna-rinna-ranna, Eric, it's so good to see you. Hamba-ranna-rinna-ramba-rinna-ranna-ranna, himba-ranna, hey, 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 ho. I have not gotten on tune over the years. Rinda randa rinda randa hey 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 ho randa rinda ra, maybe a little clapping drums. Dimba ram randa ram rinda randa rinda ra, hey da rinda hey hey hey. Cheap seats in the back looking so serious. Rimba ramba ho 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 ho. Himba ramba rimba. I don't know these people either. Himba ramba randa rindara. Himba ram. You guys, I saw you guys come before, right? How's the relationship? Good? Himba ramba bomba bomba hey 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 ho. You'll make some friends, don't worry. Boom ba rimba boom boom boom. Himbaranda rindaramba rimbaranda hey 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 ho dimbaramba rimbaramba hey hey ho dimbaramba hey hey ho himbaramba ramba rimbaramba bimba hey 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 ho. Nimba randa rinda randa hey hey hey. Bimba randa rinda randa hey hey hey. Himba ramba rinda randa rinda randa. We're so glad that Raquel made it here. Woo! Rimbaranda, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. How's it going in the back row? Ho, ho, ho. Dimba, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey, hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, ho, ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya. Ho, ho, hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Woo! Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. So, let's figure this out. So the couple of people thinking like, why are they doing that? So I apologize. I don't write this shit. I'm just following the script. Okay? So any complaints? We've appointed two people here, Matti and Walter. They're handling the complaint section. Raise your hands. Any complaints? Please go to them. Okay, they'll be handling all the issues. Thank you. Okay, yay. So, oh my God, so let's pray. We'll do a little prayer. We do a little prayer. We kind of have that little custom. And it's a big prayer. It's a really big prayer. We've been doing it for 10 years. And you have it in front of you. It'll come up. How's it going to come up? Where's the music? We got a little music here? Awesome, thank you. David. Yay. So let's just kind of sit back. And we just have a gentle prayer. And we're going to talk about prayer today. And we're going to see today, an enormous amount of material. We're going to walk through an enormous amount of material today. There's a huge journey that we want to take. And every day, we're going to try and take another piece of the journey. But here's what we're going to try and do. If you're here, and now just a serious moment with permission. Now, teasing aside, if you're here that you came for kind of, this is your personal transformation journey, right? You came for the wrong place. So I just gotta say that in the beginning, right? If this is kind of like, okay, had a week off, let's get a little wisdotainment, right? A little personal transformation journey, wrong address, okay? The facilities here, the place is gorgeous. So you came to a gorgeous place, so you can't go wrong, right? I walk around, it's just the intensity of the beauty and the care and the love that obviously goes into creating this space. It's just a deep bow, right, to this holy space. Just a deep, big hand, right? Big hand, like huge, right? Right, like, oh my God, right? Right, what a beautiful, right? Right, an amazing sacred space, right? And it's amazing to be here. But if you came for a personal transformation journey of that classical kind, right, wrong address. Right? We want to try and do something else. Okay? And it's deep, it's big, it's not simple to talk about. There's a writer named Abraham Cook, who some of you might have been reading late last night, right? Sometimes he's kind of a late night read in Belgium. And he's one of the great erotic mystics, right? Evolutionary mystics, evolutionary interior scientists of the 20th century. He's kind of, you would think in Hindu terms, think about Aurobindo. So kind of in the Hebraic, kind of hidden tradition. So this major important figure, that I've studied for years. I introduced my friend Ken Wilber to him, and we've looked at him together for years. He's an incredibly wonderful figure. And he says something kind of wild. He says, the shameless behavior of the era of the New World's approach at the edge of apocalypse comes because the world is already ready to claim the explanation of how all particular details weave together into the all. And we're not prepared for any detail to remain unconnected with cosmic magnificence. Because any detail unconnected with cosmic magnificence will not allow the mind ease. That's an incredible text. Right? I've translated it for you. Right? It's from a mystical diary. Right? It's an incredible text. Right? He's writing, and he's one of the most important thinkers. Right? An enormous amount has been written on him in the academy, right, of the 20th century. But he's a hidden thinker. And he says the collapse, right, on the edge of the apocalypse, on the edge of the new world comes. I just want you to hear the words. It's an incredible text. Because the world is already ready, right, to claim the explanation, right? So we want to claim an explanation of how all particular details, meaning every detail of my life, right? My trauma, my dreams, right? My broken dreams, right? My hurt, my wound, right? My shadow, my glory, right? My greatness, right? We want to claim the explanation. We're demanding it, how each of those particular personal details and political details and economic details, right, and social details, right, how the complete confusion and the attempt to do sense-making. Or we're trying to do sense-making. Try and do sense-making today. Try and figure out what's actually happening. What is happening in the Ukraine? Not clear. Right? I can tell you 6 stories about the Ukraine efficiently and well. Right? What actually is the real narrative of what's happening? You try and figure that out. Right? Without high-level intelligence briefings that contradict each other. You get that? The capacity to do sense-making about ourselves and about reality is broken. Right? We live in a world where there's fundamentally broken structures of sense-making about ourselves and about reality itself. So it's a world of broken sense-making. And sense-making is sensual. Right? So the sensuality of the world is broken. Right? Because we can't do sense-making. We can't know. To know is carnal. Remember Seinfeld? Yada, yada, yada. So yada is Jewish Jerry Seinfeld, right, quoting a text which says yada, which is to know. Yada, yada, yada means we don't really know anything. Yada is to know, and Adam knew Eve. Carnal knowledge, she knew him, biblically, right, means intimately. Right? So knowing is sensual. Knowing is carnal. Right? I can't be sensual. I can't be in the fuck of Kosmos or in my own fuck. Right? In any dimension of my life, if we've actually de-eroticized Kosmos, because we can't do sense-making. We can't make sense of reality. We can't make sense of our internal reality, and we can't quite make sense of what's going on out there, and we fall into a particular vector and a particular filter bubble in social media. We follow that vector, and we ignore all contradictory information because we're micro-targeted by a techplex which feeds to us that which confirms our original bias. So you can, for example, I'll just give you a United States example for a second. You can live in the United States in a what's called a Republican district or a Democratic district, called a red state and a blue state. You can scroll down in your social media feed, right, and never see the post that your neighbor sees across the street. Meaning if you live, right, you're in a red district, but you've got a, right, you're in, let's say, a Republican district, but you've got a Democratic neighbor, and you're scrolling down your social media feed, you will not see one common post. Now, I want you to get what that means. That's shocking. That's shocking. So you think you understand each other, right? But you're actually literally, not only non-intimate, right? But in this kind of war. So our sense-making externally, but also our sense-making internally. 12 schools of psychology, 12 major schools, all disagree with each other on fundamentals, right? Right? In other words, no one's actually integrated the picture. Which one's right? I went to this therapist, okay, got rid of them, went to another person, now I went to a Rolfing person, then I did some somatics, right? Then I went to a New Age seminar, then I did a kind of, other kind of retreat, and that's right. And I keep jumping from sense-making apparatus to sense-making apparatus that all actually contradict each other in some fundamental way, and I don't quite know how to put it together, and I can't locate myself in it. So do I just arbitrarily pick one and ignore all the rest of the information? That feels dislocated, right, and off, right, in my body, right? And so what Cook is saying is, he says, the breakdown at the edge of the apocalypse, right, at the edge of the new world is because, and he's writing this in his mystical diary, and I've translated it with your permission for you. He says, comes because we're at a moment where for the first time we're demanding an explanation. Yeah, I want you to read you the sentence if I can, of how all particular details weave together into the all. Yet we're not willing to settle for, this is the Hindu view, this is the Republican view, this is that Belgian party, this is that Belgian party. You guys had a hard time forming a government for a while for a whole bunch of interesting reasons. If you actually look carefully at that story, what was that about? Right? Right, hello, right? Right, it's complicated. Right, so we're demanding an explanation of how all particular details weave together into the all, and we refuse to live in a world in which any detail is unconnected with cosmic magnificence. And if there's any detail of economics, politics, my life, my psychology, my sexuality, my relationships, that's not connected with cosmic magnificence, so my mind is not at ease. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It's beautiful, right? So what does it mean? Right? What does it mean? Right? What does it mean? So what does that mean? Let's chat. Okay, what does that mean? Right? It means that we need a story that we live in. Right? We're at this time between stories. Right? We're at a time between stories. We're at a time between worlds. And in this time between stories and this time between worlds, it's unlike any time we've ever been in, because this time we have exponentialized technologies in every vector of reality that are driven by algorithmic structures that are not even monitored by human beings, that are created by human beings but then actually move independently, right? Which actually generate not the tools, but actually the immersive environment that we live in. We live in an immersive environment, algorithmically generated by private actors, and not by actors that have the good of the commons, that generated by private actors, right, who are themselves engaged in a win-lose metrics, and they create the immersive environments that we live in, right, in pretty much every vector. We have exponentialized technologies running across all the vectors. We have what's called a race to the bottom, right, or multipolar traps, or the tragedies of the commons. Meaning, for example, in the last year, 2 new protocols were developed in AI. I won't go into what each one of them is. Each of those protocols by itself is okay, but it actually evokes 7 more steps. Now, why were those 2 protocols developed? Because basically no one's willing to not develop them. Even though we don't think, especially the second one, it should be developed, but there's a race to the bottom. Because even if we agree not to develop it, I think you're going to break our agreement. Right? So I'm going to develop it anyways. And that then brings to the next step, which brings to the next step, which brings to the next step. And actually, right, artificial intelligence, if you look at it carefully, Toby Ord wrote a great essay on it at Oxford in his book Existential Risk, is actually the single biggest vector of actually existential risk, meaning no future. Now, who's governing it? Who's guiding it? As we kind of sit here, no one. No one. No one. There's no world body governing it, right? There's no story that the people involved, right, who are generating the action, there's no story that they're involved in, no set of values, no set of first principles and first values, no story of value, which guides the action. So stay close. It's a big deal, right? It's like, oh, wow. There's no story in which any detail is connected to cosmic magnificence. In other words, we live in a world that's been destoried, right? There's not a story of value that we live in, which is rooted in first principles and first values, which is a universal grammar of value. And only such a new enactment can actually respond appropriately and excitingly and creatively and ecstatically and urgently to actually existential and catastrophic risk. Let me say it differently. There's 3 ways to look at the world, and we're about to do prayer. We're just saying hi, okay? Right? Let's just say hi for a second. 3 ways to look at the world. A guy named Harris wrote this, so I want to quote him, right? Marvin Harris, right? You can look at the world through infrastructure, social structure, or superstructure, okay? Infrastructure is the techplex, right? How does it work? How does the infrastructure of stuff work, right? Social structure is the laws, right? The legal covenants, the laws, right? Those kind of structures, right? Now, usually, social structure binds infrastructure. So, for example, what does that mean? That means that laws, right, let's say passed, by the Parliament or the EU or Congress or whoever it happens to be, right? Social structure would bind infrastructure. What does infrastructure mean? Let's say the algorithmic structures of the techplex, for example. But here's the deal. Social structure can't bind infrastructure, doesn't understand infrastructure. In other words, what you need to do to understand, to bind, meaning to direct, to orient, right, to animate, right, to set the tone, right, to create regulation, to create boundaries. Right, what you need to do to understand infrastructure today, literally social structure has no idea. So, for example, when you see, just one example, interviews between a senator who's interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, right, in Congress, it's very clear that senator, although he's been briefed up the kazoo, has no idea what to ask Mark Zuckerberg. And Zuckerberg actually is laughing, right, because basically Facebook has drained the world of the top 10,000 data scientists. There's 10,000 data scientists in the world who are really fucking good, who we desperately need today to actually engage existential risk. All of them are in win-lose metrics. Universities today can't get professors to teach data science because no one wants to do it because it just pays a few $100,000 a year. Why would you do it? Because in the win-lose metrics, Facebook, right, and TikTok, right, and right, Oracle, right, and Microsoft, right, and Apple and Google, right, and Batanet, right, in other words, a bunch of others, China, right, have basically absorbed all the data science in the world that we need in order to solve, right, the most crucial data issues in a world that's data-driven. Did you get what that means? Everyone doesn't get what that means. That's existential risk. That is existential risk right in front of you. Right now, the government is a joke. Right? The government can't afford to hire data scientists who can even begin to figure out, right, what's happening in the algorithmic structures of the techplex. Do you get what I mean? So social structure, government, can't even begin to bind infrastructure. And no one even notices. Right? I mean, who's talking about that? Right? But that's actually, I could go on for 6 hours now. I promise not to. Right? Right? About points exactly like that. One after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. Right? So these are dimensions of existential risk. Just dimensions of it. And it's operating in every sector. So there's something else which is called superstructure. And this is the great news. And superstructure means, it's a fancy word, but it just means the story that you live in that's real. Right? In other words, it's not just a story, it's a story of value. Right? It's a story of value. And there's a knowing that value is real. It's not contrived. It's not made up. So that this story of value is based on first principles and first values. And everyone is operating in that story. Now, it's not a dogmatic story. It's not a Jewish story, a Hindu story, a Buddhist story, right? A New Age story, right? It's actually grounded, stay close with me, in the very structure of Kosmos itself. That's a big claim. It's a big claim. And we're going to have to qualify that claim. We're going to be very careful about it, right? It's a very specific claim. It's a careful claim, right? The person I'm working most closely on certain dimensions of this claim is a guy named Howard Bloom, who's kind of like the guru scientist of NASA. He's a brilliant science guy. And you know, I read lots of science, but he has intuitions in science. You know, he's written, you know, peer-reviewed articles in every field. And everything I think about in science, I check with him, right? I would meet with him weekly or bi-weekly. But I mean, we can ground these, right? Now, there's actually, what would it mean if there was a story of value that was grounded in the best interiors and the best exteriors? That actually was an evolving story, of value. It wasn't a frozen story, it was an evolving story. It's newer, it gets newer all the time, but there's still a story of value that we live in. There's a shared grammar of value, and we're all living inside of it. So that actually we're not living inside of a win-lose metrics, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. We're not living inside just a narrow success story, which governs every dimension of society, every corporation, the relationship between divisions in every corporation, right? Every person with society, am I successful? Right? Every one of those data scientists, I mean, it's actually shocking. Every single one of those data scientists, right, made a decision based on a narrow, rivalrous conflict based on win-lose metrics. I'm not going to work at a university. I'm not going to do research, right, because I'm going to get a $2 million package, right, in a different home, and I'm going to have a different status. We've brain drained all the, I'm using that as one example. All the data scientists that we critically need in a world driven by data, right, in order to actually reformulate, right, how we actually, the world operates at its very source code data core, that part of it, which we can do, we can't. So social structure doesn't bind infrastructure. Infrastructure is actually buying a social structure. And infrastructure itself, let's say the techplex, just as an example, right, or the AI world, actually has no superstructure. Right? Its assumption is that there's no story of value. Okay, that's a big deal. Now, I think we can this week show that that's not true. Right? That's exciting. And as I think we can actually do something wildly exciting, we're going to see lots of movies, and we're going to tell lots of stories, and we're going to have, you know, an enormous amount of joy doing it. But I think we can actually show that that's not true. I think there's a way to actually go deep in, and we're going to go through a bunch of stages, and we're going to talk about a lot of personal stuff. We're going to talk about shame and sexuality. We're going to talk about value. We're going to talk about story. We're going to theme through all of these. We're going to talk about victims and players, right? So we're going to, right, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, right? Wild ride, right? Wild story. But in the end, what we're going to be looking for is, right, can we actually begin to see the outline of, and each one of these words, I'm almost, that's why I was in terror. Each one of these words is hard to say because each one requires so much double clicking. But let me just say the words anyways. That we're actually living in an evolving story of value, not a story of value of preordained values, an evolving story of value rooted in first principles and first values. Meaning not just that we're living with first principles and first values, that's not enough. Anyone who says we know the first principles and first values and says they're not evolving is a closet fascist fundamentalist. Be careful. Right? So it's evolving first principles and first values. But, right, no sneezing, please, right? But evolving to first principle and first value, right? But it's evolving first principles and first values, number one. But number two, that's also not enough. You also need to be living in a story of value, not just a story, but a story of value. Now stay close for a second, and we're actually going to show, right, and I think we can do this conclusively and well and beautifully, that actually story itself is the first principle and first value of Cosmos. That's a huge sentence. It's actually story or information or meaning or consciousness, 4 words that actually play together. And by information, I don't mean what Shannon meant by information. Right? Shannon, the great founder of systems theory, got the math right, but the metaphor wrong, as his co-author Weaver pointed out in 1948 in an essay at Bell Lab. Right? When he talks about information, he's talking about bits and bytes. But as Weaver and Shannon pointed out in a later essay, what we really mean by information is the meaning structures of Cosmos. Cosmos actually has meaning structures all the way down. Meaning is not a human invention. That's a huge deal. Meaning was not made up by human beings. Meaning evolves. Story, not only is story real, and not only did postmodernity get it wrong when it said it's all just a story and story's not real, it is all just a story, but story is real, right? So postmodernity got exactly half right. It's all just a story, but story is real. That's wild. It's all just a story, but story is a real structure of Cosmos. Story is a first principle and first value of Cosmos. And my personal story is not bullshit. It's not, I'm lost in therapy, although parts of it might be, right? You got to distinguish between those parts, but we'll get to that. But the core notion that my story matters and that the drama of my life has infinite significance is actually right. That's a big deal. That my life is a mythic life. And that mythic life is chapter and verse in the story of reality, right? So our thesis for this week is, right, is reality is not merely a fact. Of course it's a fact. Reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story. But again, we're not saying that as a poetic statement. That's not a mytho-poetic statement. It's not like my friend Brian Swim talks about the universe story, but then he refuses to actually say that it's real. It's not a mytho-poetic statement. It's a real statement. It's an ontology statement. Reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story for real, for fucking real. The structure of reality. Right? And we're going to come back to this. And in a certain sense, the entire week's going to be a meditation on story and value. Is that fair? Now, for those of you who are thinking right now, and there's 3 people who are thinking right now, are my friends liking this? So I get that, right? Right? That's like, okay, I brought these 3-4 friends, and if they don't like it, right, then it's going to be in our relationship, and then they're going to be mad at me, right? Because I brought friends, they didn't like it. Okay, so fuck that. Okay, it's okay, right? Don't be mad at your friends if you don't like it. It's just blame me, okay? And this should be a time I should share that I'm Jewish. We can handle it. Okay. So just stay with this for a second, okay? It's beautiful, right? So reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story, right? Reality is a story as an ontological structure of Cosmos. I mean, story is real. Story is an ontology. You get what a big deal that is? And as Buddhism says, move beyond your story, at least in its Theravadan mode, certainly in its Mahayana mode, and really, you read Vajrayana pretty carefully, it says the same thing. Kashmir Shaivism, move beyond your story, right? Well, postmodernism, which is why postmodernity gets along so well with certain varieties of Buddhism, says the only real story is that there are no real stories. That's a good summation, Foucault, of postmodernism. The only grand narrative is there are no grand narratives. Of course, that's a grand narrative, but they didn't notice that. Okay, so a little performative contradiction at the heart of postmodernity. We'll skip that, okay? But you get the point, right? And postmodernity's basic point is it's all just a story, right? And this is my story of value, and this is your story of value. Now, you think this is like some minor bullshit that some Jewish guy wearing black, right, showed up to tell you at this gorgeous place. Well, it actually matters because actually it's going to affect literally, directly each of our lives. Our health, right, our interior, our friends, our sex, our love, our money. It's going to directly affect everything. But let me just play with it for a second. I want to bring in my friend, who I asked to show up. We've been in dialogue the last 5 or 6 years, but I'm going to use this as an example. So I'm going to bring in my friend, for example, Yuval Harari. And Yuval Harari is a historian, And we're not interested in Yuval Harari as a thinker. He's a very, very nice man, but he's not a thinker. He's a popular historian who is important because he's what we would call uncontaminated material. By uncontaminated material, I mean he's not philosophizing, he's reflecting the zeitgeist. That's a phrase, uncontaminated material. It's not mine, by a scholar named Chaim Soloveitchik. It's a brilliant phrase. That, meaning you go to the place whose uncontaminated material, where a person's just naturally reflecting the zeitgeist, and that's where you get what's really going on. So Yuval's uncontaminated material, meaning he's parroting, and not in a negative way, right? I mean, he's beautiful guy, right? But in other words, he's parroting the assumptions of the zeitgeist. Okay? Now just stay for a second. This is why this matters. So Barack Obama reads Yuval's book and says, yes, this is it. Jeff Bezos, right? Amazon, yes, this is it. Bill Gates, yes, this is it. This is a big deal. I can go through 30 more names who are at the core of the contemporary zeitgeist. That's a big deal. Okay? So Harari, just two quick things, just two bite sizes, so you get where the zeitgeist is, so you get that I'm not making this shit up. So he tells a story in a book called Homo Deus, chapter 7, a story about England. Where are English people? Where's Jacqueline? There you are. Okay, yay, England, okay? Merry England, okay? Tells a story about England. And it's a story about a boy, right, who lives in a particular town in England, who's really aroused, right, by the local meaning makers, and it's the, time of the Crusades in the medieval period, right? And he goes right to the Middle East, right, a particular section of Syria, and slaughters Muslims. Amen. Right? And he comes back a hero. 700 years later, the same part of England, another English boy gets really excited by the local meaning makers, and he goes to the same Middle East, this time to work for Amnesty International to help settle displaced refugees. Harari says they're both made-up stories. No essential difference between them. Right? No intrinsic value difference between them. Right? There are, and I'll quote, they are each of them, this is now I'm switching chapters to Sapiens chapter 2, an earlier book. They are, quote, both of these stories, they are both, and in Sapiens chapter 2, he gives a different example. His example there is universal human rights and Gaddafi's Libya and its brutal repression of human rights. That's his contrast there, if you read it carefully. And both of those are, three phrases, fictions, right? Meaning they're both fictions. There's no intrinsic reality to them. They're figments of our imagination, the differences between these stories of value, and mere social constructs. Right? Wow. Now, we wouldn't give a damn, right, if Harari wrote this, right, if he was a philosopher, or if he was a historian quoting a philosopher. Some dude wrote a book. Who cares? Whatever. But can you imagine 100 years ago that a president of the United States, right, would say about a book, I want you to get this, that says there's no distinction between Gaddafi's Libya and universal human rights. This is the president who stands for human rights. Now, I want you to get this. See, here's the thing. You know who's a great reader of postmodern thought? Putin. Putin is an avid reader of postmodern thought, as is the circle around him. You know who else reads postmodern thought? Xi in China. And they actually agree. And it's what makes you Xi's position and Putin's position is, if you actually read them carefully, is this is just a question of who rules and who has more power. It's a power issue. This entire issue is a power battle, and anyone who thinks that there's some exalted moral position of America is just making it up. That's just another strategic claim of information warfare. And actually, there's no difference whatsoever between our position and their position, because actually, we both believe that value is made up. And you know what? They're not wrong. Both sides do believe that at the core of their power centers. That's actually, if you trace Obama, for example, speeches over the last 15 years, which I have, right? If you trace him carefully, he's a postmodernist, dyed in the wool, right? Meaning all the stories of value are made up. Now, we happen to like his story of value, and we like him. He dances, he's cool, right? He's got great haircut, great wife, right? Awesome kids, great dude, let's have him for dinner. So we love Barack, that's not the point. You get that's not the point? It's so much deeper than that. But Obama's actually dyed-in-the-wool postmodernist, as is Bill Gates, as is Jeff Bezos, and I'll go down the list. That's a big deal. Now, they're not bad guys, but basically they can't figure out, because they've received, stay now close, they've received the collective wisdom of the academy, which basically says you can't claim intrinsic value. Right? So Obama went through university, that's what he heard, and Bezos is surrounded by academicians, that's what they say, and Gates, all the people at the Gates Foundation are saying the same thing, because that's the standard position. So we've got to figure out why. It's not that there's a bunch of idiots saying that. Really smart people are saying that, so we've got to figure out why. And then we've got to figure out what's true about it and what's completely wrong about it, and how can we actually articulate a position which Putin can get on board on. When I say Putin, I don't mean him particularly. This is not about the person, but it's about Russia. We need Russia, right? We need Russia. We need China, right? We need everyone in the game. It's not going to work otherwise. So the reason, and we need Barack in the game, right? Who's actually standing for intrinsic value, for a shared story of value. How do we do that? That's our goal this week. Okay, that's why I said I'm starting with terror, right? Now, here's the thing. But we're not going to do like a university discursive week. Let's do kind of, right? But first off, this doesn't happen at the university, number one, right? If it did, we'd have a much better university system. A good way to kind of get educated is to leave the university today. The university is kind of a hothouse for repetitive mediocrity, right? Repeating its old positions. So, but we're still not doing university. We're going to actually do this through real life. And again, we're going to talk about shame. We're going to talk about sexuality. We're going to talk about value. Right? We're going to talk about story. But along the way, I want to just, if I can, right? This is our 10th and last year of this kind of gathering, right? It's like a big deal. That's why I'm a little terror-stricken, and I am terror-stricken. I'm not pretending to be terror-stricken, right? KK and Shad and Claire can tell you I've been terror-stricken for the last 3 days, even just because you can't talk about this. You say, okay, well, you know this, you can talk about this. No, you have to completely empty yourself out. I landed 6 days ago. I spent all the last 6 days, I've read through about 1,000 pages, right, in the last 6 days of my own notes, which completely confused me, I have to say, right? I was like, fuck. Right? It's like very, very traumatic experience, I have to say. He's fucking crazy, right? But, right? So that was traumatic, right? And then you got to have to kind of empty yourself out, right? And then you got to actually learn it again, right? Like that's actually the only way to actually engage something. So I'm not coming to give you some 101 that I have. Okay, well let's give you a 101. Right? Although we've talked about these things over the years, but I'm trying to approach it with you, with permission, from the very beginning. We're going to start fresh. Tabula rasa, right? Clean slate.